Thank you everyone for showing up. I'm really interested in how humans are affected by and interact with technology. I think it's really interesting to see how as technology changes, how it will affect how we interact with it. Um, so take a second and imagine somebody that you really care about, whether it be like your sister or significant other or sibling, child, something. Imagine somebody in your head, and then imagine if you get this person goes on vacation, they're on a trip, and you see it on social media or Instagram, whatever. They're having a great time, and they're out of the country with it. All of a sudden, you get a phone call, and the phone call is saying that this person has been stopped and in prison, or we'll say hurt. And at first, you may think, well, like, is this true? Is it possible? And then you hear that person's voice on the phone, and you hear distress in their voice. You could either hang up, but kind of right now with kind of the volatility in the world and kind of the things we're going through, if you hang up, you risk not being able to get in touch with that person. If you do hang up and the person's phone doesn't ring, how do you get back in touch with whoever just called you in the first way that you had, the way that you had contact with them again? Now, because we have deep fakes and we have such extensive technology to be able to impersonate people's voices, to be able to impersonate video calls, and all the other ways that we used to kind of almost fact check if we're talking to the same human when we're not in person with them, it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between misinformation and actual, I guess, reality at this point. So, a little bit about me. I am a product manager at Microsoft. I work on the Azure Linux team, and I'm the security product manager. Used to be an FTE for the Credo team, which spelled Java for Android. I'm the co-host of On Work Around to Find Out, the education board chair for Milford Twitter, mom of three tiny humans, obsessed with coffee. Tacos are life, and if you visit me, I'm probably the most sociable. Because we're in a constant news cycle of overwhelming anxiety and change and shifts going on right now, it leaves us even more vulnerable to fear and where we are with our communicating technology right now, and that being invoked to make an overwhelming sense of urgency, and that being used upon us to either cause us to make decisions in haste, to help fool us when maybe something seems a little bit off, but we don't have the time to make that decision and see if something, while we're still trying to kind of assess if the situation is real. And it causes people to victim more and more to cybercrime. Has anyone been on Facebook or Instagram lately and saw maybe your grandma or someone in your family post a picture that they think is real and that they're supporting a cause of like a missing person or are really excited about a new plant, and you obviously know that this is not a real photo? If you looked at cybercrime as its own country, it has a higher GDP than China, and it would be the third biggest economy in the world. Raise your hand if you're between the ages of 18, or I guess 16 and 30. Anyone? How do you consume your news? Like, where do you get your news from? TikTok? Where do you, huh? Your parents? Okay. And Reddit? You said the news? Brown. Found me? Okay. Is there anybody else? Where do you get your name? Different social medias? Well, as we know, anything can go viral. There's no fact checking on if something's real or not. Anything that gets our attention can go viral. Most of Americans are consuming their news on social media, not once a day, and if like multiple times a day. And if they do actually go back to a mainstream media or news, it's maybe once. But we're checking social media multiple times a day and being constantly inundated with new and breaking news. And some of it's not even news; it's just the people's opinions, right? Now there are whole industry. There's a whole industry based off of people giving us their opinions and people trying to sway us in one way or another. And a lot of it is for clicks. It's not even because they want you to have that opinion. It's just simply because they get paid money for the more that you interact with their content, right? Thank you so much. Does anyone have children, we'll say from the age of 5 to 20? You can either have those kids or like nieces, just someone that you closely interact with. Okay. When they have a question, what do they use to find the answer for that question? Their phone? Google. Google? My boys love Alexa. They act like Alexa is their source of truth, right? So when we were growing up, we were using the encyclopedia. We learned the Dewey Decimal System. We went to the library. We learned what the, let's just say, like, what good sources of truth were, right? We had a North Star of what we knew that we could trust, right? Right now, all of our sources of truth are owned by big tech companies, right? So whether it be ChatGPT, Alexa, Siri, Google, they all have a vested interest in giving you a certain output of information, right? And then they're taking in a ton of information about you to then give you more of what you will click on, right? So it's not just to give you the most accurate, like the most accurate um, source, but it's just to give you what you'll click on more and more, and whatever is going to sell you more, right? So that is already setting up our kids in our future and the future people that are going to work and contribute to business where we don't even have a source of truth. So let's say that your kids or whoever found an absolutely wild result. Where would they go and check it? Huh? But do you think a kid would really go and check that though? No. No. Because they that's all they know as their source of truth, right? So if TikTok tomorrow tells them something absolutely wild, they're gonna tell all their friends, they're gonna repost it, and there's no fact check for that. When it comes to like an older generation, some of us are very good at technology, right? But for a long time, computers were really expensive. Unless that was something that you were going to use in your everyday life, it may not have been accessible to you. So there are whole like groups of older generation that they have not been exposed to computers in the same way that we have, right? So they are much more likely for phishing attacks. They're much more likely to be scammed by tech support. They're much more likely to accidentally click on links when they're on social media, when they're looking at, photos. They're much more likely to be a victim of social engineering scams. So it's one thing for us to have personal loss with like maybe our kids believing something that isn't true, or maybe, you know, losing an amount of money. But it is a whole nother state of loss on a geopolitical field. Like, if at this point we could have a deep fake of one country's leader doing something that could cause an act of war, and it takes minutes for something to go viral, sometimes seconds, right? And what are we going to use to figure out if that's a real video or not? And even if it isn't a real video and we can prove that, how long will it take for the real information to catch up with the viral, inaccurate information? And a lot of times it may not just lead to full on out war, but the spread of misinformation grows. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a series of cyber crime documentaries, and they talked about a bot farm and how this bot farm would just go and publish this false information. I think there was one about Meghan Markle, which is a very like odd topic to have like 45 million bots that were just on cycle scraping the internet and then putting out like false information about her. She's just a person, right? But they could automate that in a way where they had no interaction with it and the bot was just constantly pushing out misinformation about it. So can you imagine if to me, I mean that's not a super impactful subject, but put it to the like a value of a geopolitical like means of what you could get either in kind of spreading misinformation about a product or a country or actually like important issues, you could really just create a whole bot farm to push out misinformation. And when you have misinformation and you have um, kind of changing of opinion slowly, it's a slow trickle, right? And it just kind of seeps in and then it's reposted and shared. We already see multiple examples of how these fakes are not only affecting politics, but it's affecting business. There was a meeting with the financial executives in Hong Kong. They had two executives on video chat, and this video chat they convinced the one of the executives to move $25 million, and he thought he was in a meeting with two of his bosses, right? And they were like, "It's really important." And they so in this meeting with the financial execs of one of the biggest banks, I think, in Hong Kong, they used pressure and a sense of urgency to rush them to make this transfer of money. And they lost $25 million. And who is that cost going to be passed down to? Like, if we're going to lose the amount of a GDP of an entire country in cybercrime, insurance will, I mean, I'm sure pay for some of it, but in reality, it's going to be passed down to the consumer, right? So this is from Strat, and it talks about the differences between misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So it's one thing to unintentionally spread information, and it is something else to deliberately fabricate and spread information. And at this point, we have the news cycle of 24-hour news cycle was already something much different than one of our parents experienced. They watched, or we'll say our parents and grandparents watched the news once a night, right? They got news from a trusted source at one point, and then you didn't really hear about much the next day, right? Maybe you got a newspaper in the morning, but there were very distinct, trusted sources. You got it once, and it wasn't an overwhelming deluge all day, right? Then we started to have multiple news. You had multiple ways of consuming that news. You had multiple shows. You had maybe like websites that you went on, but it wasn't the same thing as constant notifications of something new. Then it got to the point where everybody could have their own website, right? So everybody can contribute to Wikipedia, everybody had their own websites, and then all of a sudden we've got influencers. So we have random people that we don't know that you end up with some of their content and you're like, I like this, I like your opinion, and all of a sudden they're constantly influencing how you see the world. some of us, that is like a constant influence of the only information that we're seeking. And it could be misinformation because they don't know any better, but there are definitely bad actors who are fabricating and deliberately manipulating what we see. Before, there had to be a little bit more work for that, right? But now we look with like Sora and all the new technology that we have coming out. I mean, they were changing the Titanic scenes that were so good that the actors had to walk off set and start doing strikes just to make sure that they didn't replace actors in movies because that's how close they were, right? And that's before they even were supposed to be training on majority of the video out there, right? So that's when they only had so much data that they were training. Data is the most valuable resource in the world. It had surpassed oil in what, like 2008? And half of the data, because of societal issues, we'll say, or societal oppression, is biased data, right? And it can be used in the wrong way. So you can actually take good, real data, right? But if you're using it in a way that you are intentionally using to fabricate or deliberately manipulate people, that's a whole nother category, right? So we have to be really careful about educating the world and our most vulnerable people and how they consume information and what they do with that information. Because partially we're also responsible for this, right? So if you're sharing things without fact checking it, if we're not educating our children on how to fact check things, we're contributing to the problem. Like we said, education is not education and laws actually. Like the government and just us as a society, we are not moving at the same pace in which we are inventing and kind of reinventing technology in the way that we interact with the world. It is moving at so much more of a aggressive pace and taking it's we every company is becoming a tech company, right? So like we used to have these big tech companies and they were kind of doing their own thing and we had regular companies that did everything else. Now every company is a tech company, right? Tech has leached its way into every part of our like lives. You've got Alexas everywhere. We have there's 50 lines of code in your pacemaker. Like that's wild. You know what I mean? It touches every part of your life. It is in your car. It is in just things that you may not think it is. So we have to be really careful. I love technology, but you do have to be careful where it's creeping into your life and what kind of influence it has and how you are dependent based off of that, right? We are coming up with new ways, like there are scans that that companies want to use to scan if like AI is, if the photo is AI or if it's a real photo. We're talking about a lot of companies want to put things on blockchain, which I'm not sure if that's really a great use case for everything, but for some things that are really important, maybe. Um, there's different like content coalition is a nonprofit that's coming together to kind of make standards and initiatives for media publishers. There are a lot of different bot technology and tools to kind of lower the amount of bots out there. So I do think that the industry is working and doing its best to come up with tools, but then that kind of creates other problems. Like, are we going to give access to all these tools? Who are we giving these tools to? Is every government going to get these tools? Are we going to make it available to schools? Are we like who are we going to make it available to, and how much money is it going to cost? Because that creates other levels of access, right? And then you have to take into account of whether the people even know when they should be using these things. You're not going to use it on your phone when you're scrolling through TikTok, you know? So, although I do think we are working as an industry to come up with tools and possibilities to help us in the future, a lot of this is going to have to be just our community. We talked about community and open source. We talked about community in a lot of ways in tech, but it's not just contributing to code, it's contributing to how we educate and talk about technology. Because the wonderful technology that we produce and put out there is going to have an effect on the way that the world works, right? So we've talked about how it affects like your personal life and the vulnerable people in our lives. We've talked about how it affects geopolitical, you know, relationships. But also, we everybody works for some sort of company, right? We all have some sort of a job, and understanding the risks of cybersecurity and having good best practices is really important. Ransom attacks have become more and more prevalent, and now there are companies that are being shut, like their data or some vital part of their technology uh is being taken down for like the average of 21 to 24 days. How many companies do you think can sustain losing access to vital parts of their like stack or product for that long? I think cybersecurity is going to have to become a lot more than just a training that we do at work sometimes that we have to ignore and just kind of like get through. It is going to be have to become something that we educate for all aspects of our lives. We're going to have to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, protecting the vulnerable people in our lives, and protecting just the way that we do business. Because in this changing landscape, the world is changing how we interact with it. So, these slides from reverse. So let's start with this one. So when it comes to mitigation with like the people in your life and our community, it looks a little bit different. I think we're going to have to make sure that we aren't contributing to the problem. So don't repost things that, are probably not real. Don't contribute to the problem. But also like teaching our children and talking about ideals and questioning the things that we consume is really important, right? Like a lot of times I'll talk to my boys and I'll be like, and they'll tell me something crazy that they heard at school, and I'm like, do you think that's true? Like, do you think that that is a likely thing that happened? Just kind of getting them to think about a lot of people may give you information, but what do you think about that information? Do you think the likelihood of that being true is really likely or not that likely? Teaching people to question things and not just kind of going along with the narrative is really important. And I think instilling that at a young age is super important because it gives them the ability to be able to navigate the world. Um, Fostering media literacy is pretty much that critical thinking and having people helping others to identify misinformation and bias sources. Also, I think kind of going and taking it back old school and teaching kids how to look at books and look at, I don't know, encyclopedias or just good sources, right? Like if whether it be like the National Geographic to look up something or just whatever sources, to really go back to those sources and figure out what are good sources. Almost like when you learn how to write a college essay, making sure that we know where to get our information from. Uh, and also, it takes a village, right? So you can mentor other people's children. You can mentor people in classes. You can talk to your friends about it. I think, especially like as a young person right now, like if you have friends and you know that the only thing that you and your friends talk about are TikTok or that kind of thing, also talking about how misinformation gets spread if you see them posting something that's absolutely ridiculous. Like I know for right now, like a lot of us are for our mental health, we're kind of not like constantly being exposed to the news, and that is good. But sometimes it is good to make sure that we are seeking out good information and sharing that too, and not just kind of the stuff that we see on social media. In business, I think backups for like data seem like they're just a redundancy plan, right? But also not just for when your data goes down for maybe a natural disaster, but also if you end up with a ransom attack, having a backup data is great insurance for the fact that if you don't pay that ransom and you have all of that data backed up, you don't have to kind of just go with the ransom attack. So, yeah. I think a lot of times we overcomplicate things And we think cybersecurity is really hard when 90% of cybersecurity issues are humans not following best practices. So really keeping it simple and just, you know, people don't need access to things that is not part of their everyday work. Principles of least privilege, firewall, network security, just kind of doing the right thing at a small scale is really important. Um, Educating people about cybersecurity. Some of my favorite the way that Snapchat did it was they would send out an actual link in an email, and it would be different like phishing and different like uh examples, and they would try to get you to click on this link, and if you clicked on it you had to do security training, and they were actually testing to see if you would actually like fall bait to it. So you were constantly like you didn't want to get put in like, you know, timeout, so you were gonna like pay attention when you got sent things. And I think like nobody wants to sit there and just watch a video if you don't have to. So having engaging security education and then having interesting ways to make sure that you're staying on top of it and not just that once a year security training is really important. Conducting regular security audits, making sure you have resilient architecture with recovery points all implicit. That's pretty much the talk. It's just, I think that as a community, we're going to have to work harder at kind of coming together and making sure everybody stays safe, whether that be in business or just on a human scale. Because I love technology, I love the newest things and the coolest things, but anything that's smart is vulnerable. You know, anything that you put in your home that is technology, the more that technology gets into our lives, the more vulnerable we are to attacks and cybercrime. And if we don't do our due diligence to evolve with the technological world and to know that we can protect ourselves, we are putting ourselves and our loved ones at risk and our business. And honestly, we all want jobs, right? So, like, when companies lose that money, we live in a capitalistic system and it's going to be passed down to us, right? So, it's like the more we educate ourselves on cybersecurity and the more that we put that into our everyday life, I think we can actually enjoy technology more because we know that we're doing what we need to do to keep it safe. Because the alternative, sadly, is the more that cybercrime happens, the more that we either will have to limit access to it, to the technology and the way that we do things, or people are going to become scared of it because they don't know enough about it. So education becomes really important for one, for us to be able to use it to its best, to our best of abilities, and for us to use it in a safe manner. You wouldn't give your kids a key to your car without teaching them how to drive it, right? And technology has so much good to it and so many things that we can do with it and improve our lives, but we have to teach people to do it safely. So that's my thought. Thank you.